Good afternoon. It's an honor to welcome the class of 2016 to join the ranks of Jesuit alumni, and welcome you fellow alums for the privilege of being up here with you. It's really great to be back home in New Orleans after 28 years in the Northeast, where I had a long journalism career that's taken me far and wide, and finally moving home in 2010. And congrats to the Jesuit lacrosse team for their 5th consecutive state championship. They burned all your equipment and they still couldn't stop you. I have a special place in my heart for the lacrosse team. My fiancée lives in Shreveport and both her children are playing lacrosse. Your practice field at Harrison and Marconi is the very same fields that I practiced on for soccer at Jesuit. And I live 3 blocks away from there. So when I see you guys out there practicing, I see myself, and it feels great. All of these alumni here see themselves in you. That's why they're here, as they welcome you into the adult family of Jesuit. They're timeless Blue Jays. They're older guys. Some of us getting really old, some of us getting gray. I'm actually getting gray. I dye my hair. But they're a bunch of cool guys, and you really need to get to know them. And I hope you see us all that way, because that's how we see ourselves. Fun-loving, vibrant, always striving to live the core Jesuit values, to be a man for others, to lead by example, and to live a balanced life with a strong spirit, strong mind, and a strong body for the greater glory of God. When I was a Jesuit, I felt like a scrawny kid. I felt like I was always smaller. Everyone was bigger, stronger, more popular. But I made a deal with myself that I would just make myself a little bit better every day. And if I did that, I would become a much bigger and better man. I appeal to you young Jesuits to take that same approach in life and build on those core values of Jesuit. Your growth will know no bounds. Nothing has molded me more than my time at Jesuit, and it has stayed with me to this day. I've been blessed to have an amazing career in journalism. I've traveled far and wide, exposed to things that seem otherworldly. You may have seen some of these pictures. It's like being taken around by the ghost of Christmas future. And as you can see, not all of it has been pleasant. I've covered some amazing things. For example, I did a story on a mother in the South Bronx who lost her son. He was murdered for the gold chain around his neck. Kids from the neighborhood were pilfering through his pockets as he lay there dying. And she's crying, telling me this story. The next day, his killers saw her. They set their boombox down and started dancing, taunting her. It's a very different world out there, people with a lot less values than you have. I did a story on the crack epidemic, a lengthy time covering the crack epidemic in the South Bronx. I introduced myself to drug dealers on the street and gained their trust so that I could go into alleyways and vestibules with them so they could show me their drugs and their guns and photograph them. I sat in cars parked shooting drug transactions from afar. I did drive-by shootings where I drive by a crack house and make pictures of the drug gangs in the front and then speed off when they saw that I was doing. I did a story of a mother dying of AIDS, a single mother. Her name was Rosemary Holmstrom. She spent the last year of her life desperately trying to find a family to adopt her son that she was happy with so that her son wouldn't go into the system. I became very close to them, and they made a mark on me to this day, like so many other subjects that I photographed have. I've covered the incredible seismic politics of Haiti for years, one of the most impoverished nations in the world, which is right off of our coast. I remember when I was in Haiti photographing these 2 girls, they went on the radio, we were eating lunch, and they went on the radio and started telling the story of how the Haitian army took their mother out of the house and killed her, and they found her head and her legs in a ditch. While we were listening, the army stormed that radio station only to find a tape recording. The girls were now in hiding. And we found those girls, and due to our story, they got into Miami and got political asylum because of our story, something we're very proud of. There are many stories like that where journalism makes an impact and makes difference in other people's life. I remember photographing a woman wailing over the corpse of her husband in a ditch that was full of raw sewerage. He was dragged out of the house in the middle of the night and executed by the attachés. And she's crying over his body, and his body had been eaten up by wild pigs during the night. And this was on a Sunday when everyone else was going to church. I remember covering unrest. There was a demonstration, and these attachés opened fire on the crowd, and they were actively shooting at and killing people. One of these attachés, in the process of killing people, turned to me and pointed his gun right at my head and started screaming at me in Creole, a language I didn't even understand. One night we were driving home from dinner, and we were overtaken by cars that were filled with 13 attachés with Uzis, 13 of them, because I counted them. And they took the Haitians out of our car, and they took them away, and we didn't even know if we were going to get them back. Fortunately, we did. Once we got them back, we went back to our hotel. We woke up the innkeeper, we banged on his door, and we made him unlock the bar. I covered the Haiti earthquake. And you can't imagine, you saw some pictures here, the massive amounts of death and stench. All these people who are already suffering in poverty now were homeless, and the streets were filled with homeless people, chanting in the middle of the night, chanting all night long. You could hear their songs, it would weave in your sleep. And the songs they were singing and chanting were begging God to please spare them any more of his wrath. For these poor people thought God did this to punish them. I covered 9/11 at the Pentagon 10 minutes after the plane hit. And then I was at Ground Zero the next day. A month later, I was in Pakistan and Afghanistan. I was walking around in Pakistan covering demonstrations of people 10,000 strong, angry, celebrating the attacks on America, holding up posters of bin Laden, looking victorious in front of pictures of the crumbling World Trade Center. They kept challenging me, saying, "Where are you from? Where are you from?" And I kept telling them every time, Canada. I got no problem lying in that situation. I could have said Jesuit, maybe it would have done the same thing. Next thing I know, I was in Afghanistan, and if I thought the perils in Pakistan were great, going into Afghanistan, they were even worse. We were trying to get into Kabul. We were in a busload, a convoy of journalists, and there was anti-aircraft fire coming off the roadway, the bus lurching and stopping and starting, trying to decide when to go for a break to not get hit by the gunfire. We got into Jalalabad. We had 4 days of quiet, peace. Everything seemed normal. We got lulled in a false sense of security. We all had a meeting that night, decided we were going to make a trip to Kabul the next day. We wanted to get to Kabul. We all went out on the road that morning. The waiter wouldn't bring me my coffee. He delayed me for about a half hour, and I needed my coffee. We were about a half hour behind these other guys, people who were becoming friends of mine. They ran into a roadblock. These journalists were pulled out of their car and executed at the side of the road. We were heading into that same roadblock. We got stopped by their drivers fleeing the opposite direction. They stopped us and warned us. This is the beginning of an era where people will kill you just because you're an American or a Westerner. They'll kill you just because you're a Christian. They'll kill you for any kind of reason. It used to be journalists had immunity, a diplomatic immunity. That's no longer the case. But all was not bad in my travels. I had some life-changing moments that helped bring all the suffering and evil I had seen into a perspective that was balanced with hope. I had some moments of spiritual transformation that I want to share with you. So let me backtrack a bit. I was sent to cover the unrest in the West Bank after the Hebron massacre in 1994. I was staying in Jerusalem. I was staying in Jerusalem. I went to Bethlehem for the day. I went to the Church of the Nativity. I wanted to see the place where Christ was born. It was the middle of the day. There were crowds. There were busloads of tourists. There were long lines to get down into the grotto, down to the spot where they believed Christ was born. And I didn't have much time. I couldn't wait in this line, so I put my good Jesuit education to use, and I went in through the exit. And I went down into the grotto. There was no line. So I went down in there, but it was crowded, and people were pushing just to get a glimpse of where the manger was and a glimpse of where Christ was supposedly born. And I just couldn't feel it, and it was hot, and I just had to get out, and I left. And I came back at closing time, and the doors were still unlocked. And I went into the church, and it was empty. And I went down into the grotto, and I was all alone at the spot where Christ was believed to be born. I can't tell you, it was like the first moment of grace that I had ever experienced. I felt overwhelmingly small and felt for the first time that incredible power moment of grace. I knelt down at the spot where Christ was believed to be born. I laid my cameras down and I started weeping uncontrollably. The most beautiful feelings and warmth and love came over me. Complete humility and surrender. I prayed and I asked God to help me use my cameras and my ability to show the suffering and hardships of those less fortunate, to open the hearts and minds of others. Mind you, I had not been a practicing Catholic in my adult life up to this point. That was still to come several years later, when I went to India. I spent a lot of time around Mother Teresa in Calcutta, in her mother house, where she was praying in her chapel. I prayed next to her many times. I worked as a volunteer in her original home for the dying, Kalighat. It wasn't an assignment that brought me there, but it was my own volition. I had read she was ill with malaria, and I felt if living this living saint, maybe the greatest person of our time, was going to die, and I didn't take advantage of the opportunity to document it, the opportunity would be lost, and my regrets would be with me forever. So I just felt this urge, a need that I couldn't really describe to you. So I wrote a heartfelt letter to her, some of the contents of which I just shared with you about my time at the grotto. And I never got a reply, so I sought out our sisters in the Bronx, and I was in New York at the time, and I sought them out. And I sat down with Sister Dominga, the Sister Superior, and she said, do you have a copy of the letter? And I gave it to her, and she read it, and she said, did you get a reply? And I said, no, they never replied. And she just looked at me and said, I think you should go. She said, I think maybe God is calling you for a reason. And she gave me a game plan. She had the smarts of a photo editor, and she said, why don't you just go, give the letter, wait a few days, Mother will read it, and then she'll probably give you some access to the missions, and you'll probably see some very compelling things that will make some beautiful pictures that the world needs to see. So I bought a ticket, and all of a sudden I was going to Calcutta. I had no plan. I walked up to the Mother house, I knock on the door. I give them the letter, they say we hadn't received it. She said, Mother will read this letter, come back in a few days. And I thought, a few days? All of this stuff was bubbling out of me, this compelling need to do something. I was being pulled and called in ways that I'll never understand. Maybe that's one of those great mysteries in life that we're not intended to understand when we're inspired to do something. So I found a church nearby, and I went into this church, and again I knelt down, and I had another incredible moment of grace where I just started crying, just because I felt this need to do this, and I couldn't understand why it was taking so long, and it kept me in a little state of anguish. So I went back, and they said, had me sit down. She said, Mother read your letter. She prayed about it, and we decided this would be a good thing. And what a watershed moment. So, I said, that's great. And I said, I really want to work as a volunteer on your mission too. And she said, that would be good. So I went on to Kalighat, and I went in there, and you go down these steps, and it's like a dungeon. It's very primitive. The light is streaming in through the windows. There's old cots lined up with all these people shriveled and dying and moaning, and people helping them. And the stench, it was very arresting. But in the process of doing the work, you go through a awesome mental and spiritual transformation that happens really quick. The smell goes away. You realize that there's a prevailing mood of love and peace and happiness. There was esprit de corps amongst the workers, the volunteers, and the nuns. It's the only time I've ever seen, and the first time I've ever seen, joy amidst poverty. And it made me realize that the most essential experiences in life have nothing to do with your mere material possessions or your social status. They're uniquely human, and they're experiences that are given to you because you belong to God. A lot of these patients, they look like they're 80 years old, but when you look in the registry, They were like 40 years old. They'd never seen a doctor in their life. And then I witnessed the transformation of the patients from fear to discomfort to peace. And as you work as a volunteer, you do things like you help them to the bath, and you disrobe them, and your hands become their hands because they're too weak, and you help bathe them, and you dry them, and you help them back, and they're cold because they just got out the water, so you put the extra blanket on them. You feed them. Sometimes they're so weak you have to put the food in their mouth, and you push their jaw closed for them and help them chew. And then when one's starting to go, you sit down with them, and you hold their hand, and you look in their eyes, and you don't even speak their language, but you're communicating with them. It's really beautiful work, and the bonds amongst the volunteers was incredible, and there's no question that everyone who did that work also experienced a very life-changing experience as well. The work itself is what transformed me, and I underwent a value shift. There are some lessons that Mother Teresa taught by doing this. She brought people in to do this kind of work because she was a teacher. She was doing it as much for the volunteers as she was doing it for the patients. And here are a few of those lessons. One is, she had a sign up in several of her homes that said, God is love. God is love. God exists in us in the form of love. So if love is in each one of us, then our hands of love on our fellow man is actually loving God. When we love our fellow man, we are honoring God. It's up to us to find God in our fellow man, as discreet as he may be. Another lesson, she had a sign, the work is the prayer. The actual physical act of doing acts of goodness is the actual prayer. There was a priest who was doing help at the missions, and he had some talks with us, and he phrased it this way. He said, the degree to which your prayer life is working is not necessarily what happens in the church, but what happens outside the church. You don't have to experience moments of grace regularly. It only happened to me a couple times in my life. Sometimes you go to church and you're kind of going through the motions and you're not really sure why, but you keep doing it because it's the right thing to do. Mother would say, don't worry, keep doing the work. It will come. All of the small positive decisions that you make every day formulate yourself as a human and how much of the Spirit of Christ you manifest in yourself. It affects you as you present yourself to others. It affects how you relate to others. It affects what you have to offer as a man for others and to be a leader by example. Your prayer life is an exercise not unlike running or cycling or going to a gym. You don't have to run, you don't run a half marathon without training for it. You can't live a fulfilling life without training for it through prayer, introspection, conscientiousness, and humility. As we go through our daily life as flawed humans, we get knocked around. We compete for resources. We have adversaries. We harvest negative energy and feelings, and we have negative urges and impulses. It's the human experience because we are all flawed. A prayer life is the avenue to relieve yourself of as much of that as you can and be more perfect for Christ. A basic prayer life, which means at least applying yourself to prayer once a week, if not daily, brings about peace through your loving dialogue with God and allows you to shed yourself of the negative thoughts and impulses and continually mold yourself into a more pure and good person that God asks you to be. You resolve the negativity inside you to be more outwardly focused as a man of goodness. So as I was working in the missions, I started pondering things about the meaning of life and what does this all mean and why are we doing this? So I want to fast forward a bit. On my return from Calcutta, I'm back in New York City, and I'm back working, and I'm driving home one beautiful evening up the Henry Hudson Parkway, and I called Sister Domingo. And I said, Sister, I just got back from Calcutta. And she goes, oh, how was it, Gerald? And I said, it was beautiful. It was like an inversion of values. I feel changed. I feel like I finally did something with a sense of purpose. I just feel so happy. I feel joyful. And she said, Gerald, that's wonderful, because it is truly God's glory to be completely filled with joy. And I stopped. I'm driving and almost rear-ended the guy in front of me, and I was like, what did she just say? It truly, no one ever said something like that to me before, and I just thought about it. It is truly God's glory to be completely filled with joy. And it's one of the most meaningful messages anyone's ever said to me. God's glory, to me, means purpose. What is your purpose? God's glory, what He intends of you. Completely, when she says completely filled with joy, to me completely means a surrender, a complete surrender. And to be filled with joy, what does that mean? To me, it means to live happily, without conflict, with robust relationships with others, filled with love. Because remember, God is love. Faith can be hard to grasp. We all have our moments. Even Mother Teresa wrote in one of her letters when she was in her contemplative stage, she questioned the existence of God herself. I find that comforting because it reminds me, as beautiful and holy as she was still human like the rest of us. It's natural to question it sometimes. We all have our doubts. But there are great mysteries that we're never intended to understand. So we look to the clues around us. If you put your hand in a fire, it hurts. If you step into a pool of cool water on a hot summer evening, it feels good. Strife and anger hurt. Love feels wonderful. Humor feels great. Just as we're wired to avoid the things that hurt, we're wired to be drawn to what feels good, not just physically, but spiritually. God wants us to make the most of His gifts, and we only need to look and listen for the cues. Thus, God intends us to love one another. And we love and worship Him by loving our fellow man and embrace the gifts of life that abound. He intends us to use our talents to the best of our abilities, enrich our relationships with each other as friends, family, community, and co-workers. God wants us to live a robust, fun, and happy life. That doesn't sound too hard, does it? But there's another element and another lesson, a lesson in forgiveness. I was finally, when Mother Teresa died, I was sent back to Calcutta by the New York Daily News to cover her funeral. So I'm on the plane on the way, and my seatmate was one of the missionaries of Charities. She's on her way back to the funeral as well. So we had a lot of time to talk. And I had some big conflicts in my heart. And the biggest one, I had a big conflict with my boss. And it had been going on for a couple years, and it was the kind of thing that I was losing sleep over. You know, I had all of that danger and exposure to horrible things that I had been through. I felt I had done so much for the company, yet I felt that he didn't even want me to work there anymore. I felt that I had trouble reconciling all of that and how I was being treated. And it was giving me a lot of angst, and I told her about all of this. And interestingly, Mother Teresa died on my birthday. And my boss's mother also died on that day. And someone told me this right before I left for Calcutta. And I hadn't told the sister this, and she just said, you know, one thing Mother taught was how to love one another and forgive freely. And I thought, and immediately this note of condolence popped into my head, word for word. And it stayed there until I got home and wrote this note to my boss. And I said, I am sorry to hear the passing of your mother. I am praying for her eternal repose. It sounds like she passed away around the same time as Mother Teresa. This serves as special remembrance because one thing Mother Teresa did was to teach others how to love one another and how to forgive freely. My sincerest thoughts, Gerald. I put it on his desk. And I want to tell you, from that moment forward, the sword was completely buried between us. There was no longer any ill will. And I learned something really great that day. The lesson to be drawn from this is that a unilateral gesture of love or goodwill has the potential to immediately and completely transform a relationship with an adversary, if you are bold enough to take the lead. And that is leading by example. Ill will or anger that you carry around hurts you as much as it hurts others. You'll never attain that vision of being completely filled with joy if you're carrying around anger. You won't get all the way there. In order to be truly happy and at peace, you will have to be willing to forgive freely. And in closing, I feel it important. I want to acknowledge one very special Blue Jay to me. It was my father, Dr. Stephen Herbert, class of 46. All the tricks in 46. We were just talking about this at our table. He grew up on Galvez Street. He was poor. He got work study at Jesuit. He got scholarship at Loyola. He got scholarship through med school at LSU. He really was a man for others. I mean, he was a great father. We had 8 kids. He was a physician who always cared for his dying patients. I really didn't spend enough time with him in high school because he was always going back to the hospital at 3, 4 in the morning to care for his patients. He was a lung doctor, and he had all these patients dying of lung cancer. And when I was about your age, you know, graduating from Jesuit, I was 3 weeks, it was August of '82. I had just graduated in May. And we were 3 weeks away from my mom and dad driving me up to Boston University to go to college, and we got the phone call, and he had a heart attack. He was at the hospital, and he had a massive heart attack. And his heart stopped. And by the time they got him to the ER, they had to resuscitate him, and they brought him back. And the next day I got to his room, and I saw him laying there, pale and hooked up to these machines, and the doctors were telling us that he's not out of the woods, he may not make it. And talk about life blindsiding you. It was too soon to lose my father, and I'm looking at him, and I feel like I'm about to lose him. And he was just about to take me away to school, and he was my dad. And I held his hand, and I said, "How do you feel, Dad?" And he said, "You know, I went under." And I said, "I know. What was it like?" And he said, "It was beautiful." He described to me this coming out of his body and seeing from above. And he described everything going from black to white. Things from black went to white, white went to black. And he described this beautiful, warm light that was drawing him. And he said it was a presence, it was a being, and it was beautiful. And then he came back, and he said, "Now I know. I'm not afraid. If I live 1 year or 5 years, it's okay, because now I know." And you know, we got him for 34 more years. And we just buried my dad in January, actually the day I got engaged. So it's a very special day for me. It was a beautiful day and a beautiful send-off. Father McGinn was there as one of the celebrants. And you know, when we talk about the clues around you, that was my clue. Whenever I have any question about faith, and of course I do, sometimes I question, what is this? Am I just being silly? I look to that clue. I don't need to find it in a scripture or from a theology teacher. I know now because my dad has been there, and he told me. And he was a man for others. And so I just wanted to honor him and thank you all, and have a wonderful day for the greater glory of God.